Y is coming to us through FX. So let me say a few words before we get into the trailer onto itself. What is Y? Well, Y is essentially a dystopian science fiction story through Vertigo, which is basically a very much more mature end of the DC universe. It's not tied to the main universe. It's sort of allowing stories with a lot of adult themes, adult language, nudity, cursing, and other subject matter to be explored. And Y essentially has basically the male species die off. Why the male species has gone away is not really clarified. It's a very clever little story where there are multiple explanations, but we never know for sure why men have disappeared. So all men have disappeared except for one person, Yorick, and his monkey. And essentially the adventure is how Yorick, the monkey, and other allies try to navigate this very strange kind of fictional world where, again, women are dominant and they are very, very powerful. So even though it's told from a kind of left-wing perspective and is, I think, and even though it's told from a left perspective and does sort of have, again, at the subtext, a kind of feminist message, it's mostly just a straightforward science fiction story with a very clever premise. I probably don't love it as much as other people do. I don't think it's like Watchmen. I don't think it's one of the greatest comic books of all time, but it is really, really strong. It's very funny. It's mostly well drawn. It's very well paced. It does have a few flaws here and there, but it's a very excellent story and I think very well told. And the attempt to get it either as a film or television series has been going for a long time. I've always had my ear out for it here and there, but I sort of just gave up because there were so many times it was happening, then it wasn't happening. And it just seemed like, okay, you just have to be happy with the comic book and that's it. But now, apparently, it finally is going to occur with FX, and they've dropped a trailer, and we get a little bit of a tease as to how they're trying to adapt the story. Well, what do I think? Well, again, this isn't a big budget, so they have to be very, very careful with what they're showing. And it obviously can't match a comic book because comic books, by their very nature, can just show you so much and are not restricted by a budget. So it is comparing apples and oranges. So I don't think this is ever going to be anywhere close to the power or even the scope of the books where you can just do whatever you please. Still, there are kind of tentative reasons for hope. It did seem that they did a good job with casting because the characters more or less look like they do in the books, and they do keep to the central premise. However, the trailer doesn't really tell us if they're replicating the story with its ambiguity, because there we're not really told what happens in terms of why men died out. This does seem to be taking for granted it's a pandemic, so it's a kind of biological thing, and then it's how the government and all these women are going to respond. And some people are already getting panicky because one of the characters already beats up Yorick easily. That's in the book. He's not a very physical character. He's not a weakling. There are times where he gets into a lot of trouble and he does manage to get himself out of it. But physically speaking, they do make a joke of this, that he's just not, he's not a martial artist. He's not really big and bulky. He's not Superman. He doesn't have insane muscularity. So he does have to rely upon women to help him out quite a lot throughout the whole story. If you're concerned that this is going to be the so-called woke issue, you really don't want to even see the story to begin with because it already has kind of like these woke premises built into it. But it's a really, really great story. So I'm more worried that the budget is going to really hamper them and that we're not going to be able to really fully capture the world. And they do a very clever job of showing society breaking down. But this, again, is not like the books where it's very, very expansive and we get to travel all over the world very easily, which you can do in a comic. But again, it does have a lot of talented people attached, and it does feel like they're at least trying to get the casting right. So that was really interesting. But already it does seem like they're going to try to go down a different route. Felt very close to Stephen King's The Stand, which is a good story, but that's a very, very different way of thinking about the apocalypse and how society's breaking down. There's a very clear gendered framing that Brian is using for his story. So FX does have a good reputation on what it does with Sons of Anarchy. So there's a cautious note for optimism because it looks good for now for Y. And I'm going to keep track of this because I do like the story. I've read every comic and I really, really enjoyed it. Now, I read it through the trade paperback, so I only have a few issues of the original Y, but it seemed that it was being faithfully replicated in trade paperbacks. So hopefully they're going to try to do a very good job of translating this very interesting story for FX, but we shall wait and see. Thanks for listening.